being here. Thanks for having me. Can I put this in here, maybe?
Yeah.
Like, if I talk like from here, you can hear it? Yeah. Oh, hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me, SNAG. It's super exciting to be a part of the programming this year, and cool how SNAG is developing programming at Tucson. And yeah, I'm just super honored to be here, and I just have a short kind of talk. SNAG asked me to talk about value, actually, fitting for a place like the Jen and Nicole show. And so, yeah, so I'll try to touch on that if I can. So Tucson it's really nice also to be here because I can drive. It's like 5 hours from where I live, which is in El Paso, Texas. And there I teach at the University of Texas, El Paso. I run the Jewelry and Metals program. And I call it home now, but I've only been there maybe almost 10 years actually at this point. So it feels like home, but home is something that's like very not permanent for me. Like I grew up moving around a lot. So my connection to place and like the question that's like, where are you from? I actually cannot answer this question because I live in so many places. Like I don't even remember what was the place where I was born, for instance, you know? So as I was growing up, like that wasn't so critical to me. It wasn't important to me. What was important was my family. We were always together as we were place to place. But also like the things that went with us. So all of our stuff. That always was like the constant in my life. And I'm reflecting on this in hindsight, like I realized like as a kid and now as an adult, I have a really strong connection to things, whether they're like important like or not. Like I develop meaning for things over time. We all do, right? So it's based on like our own sort of perceived value of what's in our world, and that has a lot to do with our experiences and kind of the things that surround the objects, not maybe necessarily the objects themselves. So when I think about value, I think of it as something that's really subjective, and I think about how we all we place value on things like very differently. And for me, and in my work, value really comes from meaning, actually. Like the way you place meaning towards things gives it value, no matter if it's like actually monetary, like worth anything, right? So I really think that that's very important. And in my work, I think it's coming a lot from the way I observe the world and the way that I see the things around me. And you know, over time I'm realizing like I get sort of like obsessions with things that don't necessarily like, that we don't think about actually in our day-to-day lives. Things that have no monetary value per se. But as I like recognize that I get this sort of observant and curious like way of paying attention to what's around me, I realize that that's like a way to find meaning in things that are mundane. And that through that you can like reveal a lot of different kind of like stories or different sort of connections. Maybe it's like the object is actually like helping you go through the object to get to those things. But it can start there with something as simple as like a staple or a broom or a shoelace. Those are some examples I brought today that I think you'll come look close at. But and then on the screen I have looping, like images, more images of my work and some inspiration stuff and process as well. So, what was I going to say next? Well, yeah, so just that, like, you know, an object can be something we don't think about. Like, you know, I need something like a staple, for instance. I need this to repair things. And that's actually how my work with staples, which is that right there. That's how my work with staples sort of began. I was thinking about value, but in particular, like the the choice of the material came from thinking about like what we use to repair, like what we use to repair things in our world. Staples are used to like repair our bodies, for instance, or they hold paper together. There's a ceramic tradition of repair. It's called stapleware, that pieces back together broken shards of ceramic using staples in a way that makes it, usually it's like if it was a plate, it'd be like on the back side of the plate, so you actually wouldn't see the staples. The plate would become sort of like, it's like perfect again, but on the back you see these like sutures. So I was thinking a lot about repair and how actually the act of making a repair is really meaningful. Like it can hold, like that provides value to the thing. And maybe someone that's repairing their socks or their broken mug, for instance, maybe they don't think that they're doing that in a meaningful way. It might actually just be necessity, like you have to do it because you don't have time or you don't have resources to just replace it and get a new one. But I think that it can be such a meaningful way of thinking about objects and value. And so that's sort of like the staple work started there, and it was like technical experimentation that led me to figuring out like ways I could just work with the material as a maker, like what could I do that's interesting. And over time I developed what you're seeing on the screen, which is a way of taking those individual staples that I individually like punch out from the stapler. I have an electric stapler actually, and then placing them, nest them within themselves, make this sort of pattern that can kind of grow in any sort of scale, make a sheet, and then I can fabricate it with it, just like I could a piece of silver or copper, you know. So through that, it became like this aha moment of like, I have so many possibilities in terms of design. Like I could really make really large scale pieces. I could like endlessly continue doing this. And what I really like about it is like the material, the object, the staple, like it's really transformed. Like usually people do recognize it after a minute, right? But from far away, you're sort of like, what is this mesh? Or, you know, it's not readily apparent like from first glance. So I really like that. I like that it takes sort of like a little investigation and to go a little deeper into this work to kind of understand and recognize what it is. And so that's sort of like how I think about value with that work. And as I continue to make, you know, making this work for a while, I want to sort of like branch out and not only work with this one material. I feel like it has a lot of meaning in how I began to work with it and how my own process of making provides value as well, my own labor in making the work. But what I realize is like I'm super interested in that, but also how maybe a connection to an object can be valuable in what we know about it through like a deeper investigation, like things that are connected to people or places or other experiences, and how that can inform an even deeper connection to stuff. Especially like in things that we use that are sort of like this everyday, like we just don't really think that they're valuable to us. They're just sort of like tools, for instance. And I like to ask myself like lots of questions, like who makes this thing? Like the staple, it started there because I actually don't know who makes the staples, but somebody makes them actually. So it's a lot of thinking about like my own labor and that of someone that is also a part of this, and kind of investigating deeper and deeper, like finding other materials where I can sort of like tell that story more closely. I feel kind of detached from that part of the staple work where I don't know who makes it, and that's sort of like what it's about. So if I can find materials that resonate with me, then I can sort of like dive deeper into the connections that they might have to other communities, other people, their own histories. And so that's how I have developed the work that's up here you're seeing, which is made with shoelaces and with a broom. I was in Mexico City a couple of years ago now for an extended period of time, and I was walking around and I saw this flowing object go past my peripheral vision, and it was really bright and colorful, and it just like really caught my attention. It was like very strange. I didn't see a person, I just saw this like flowing fabric, and I realized it was this cart of shoelaces that were hanging, and someone was pushing a street vendor was pushing this cart to go pop up in this neighborhood to sell the shoelaces. And what started as like, oh wow, that's like a really beautiful like Nick Cave like sound suit or something, turned into like, it's this, you know, it's just this sort of like mundane thing actually, even though it's really beautiful. So I thought, well, I should make a piece with that material. Like the shoelace could be something to investigate. So I purchased some shoelaces, and as I was doing that, like a pretty banal transaction, I was asking the vendor just a few basic sort of like questions, you know, like, how long have you been doing this? And are you always in this neighborhood? And through that, the simple questions, just asking about this person and their experience with this object, it was, you know, became a really meaningful thing to me, because she was telling me her kind of history with the shoelace, which is that, you know, Ceci, who had been selling the shoelaces for 5 or 6 years, in that same neighborhood, because her father has been doing it for over 20, and now her little brother, who's on the screen behind me at some point, is also helping. So it's like a family business, you know. And so it just like, it made me, not that I have to have that, but it really made me feel more connected to the material, and in a way like made me excited to work with it. As a maker, that's what is really important, you know. Like I always say that to my students, like, what do you want to make? Like, what are you excited to make? And it like drew me into the material through like that like glance of this object, and then finding out just a little bit more about it, and then kind of with my skill set and developing some new skills, like trying to make some variations with the material, transform it the way I do with the staple, and make it less recognizable at first. And another material that's on the table is a broom, and so in Mexico City as well, when I got there, I became like very, very obsessed with the brooms. Like as soon as I got there, I noticed them because they're not what I'm used to seeing. They don't look like a broom that I recognize. So it's just this basic, like started that way. And then I realized like everyone has them, like people in their homes, but also the people that work for the city. They're sweeping the streets with these things, and they have this beautiful shape from being used. And because they're used by city workers, like the whole city, if you're paying attention to it, you hear the sound of sweeping, and it's really a beautiful sound actually. And so that was another thing where I thought, well, if I could get myself a broom, then I can make a piece of jewelry with it. And so I was there for an extended chunk of time, and the street that I was living on, like every neighborhood has their own street cleaners, and so I ran out one day to ask the street cleaners if they knew like who made these things and like where I could get one, and they said that they made them, and I asked if I could purchase, and they're like, sure, we'll be back later. And so they brought me a really massive broom, and then I was able, right, then I had my material, and I could explore like what I could do with this material, how I could transform this material to provide meaning and provide that value that I was seeing and do see in it. The way that I constructed this necklace is totally inspired by the way that they're made, which is very simple. It's just sort of steel wire binding the natural plant material around a rod. And so I just felt like that was this perfect way to sort of like honor and make this sort of homage to this object and these people and this sort of like active care that they provide, like that I could maybe provide too through these pieces, like the shoelace, using shoelaces to sort of make this homage to an experience, which is meaningful to me anyway. And yeah, that's like sort of how I think about value and material and objects and how it all comes together. Like labor is value, like we can put a price on that, but it's really like, it's really about meaning and like how you find meaning in that. And that's sort of like the way I see it. And I brought pieces so that you could just come and take a look at them and ask me questions, and we can continue the conversation. Yeah?
What is that brown material that's with the broom?
This, the like necklace part of it, it's the handle of the broom.
Okay.
So I cut it up on the bandsaw, I was at a residency, on the bandsaw there, which was very bad. The bandsaw was very dull, but it left all these beautiful burn marks that I really liked. But it's the handle, and I felt like so lucky that when they brought me the broom, it had this beautiful green paint. Because that's the only thing that really makes them kind of different, is the handle part of it. Otherwise, it's these twigs and steel wire. But yeah, it's the handle of the broom.
And the sticks also the working.
Yes, so the sticks that make the pendant are the bristles of the broom. Yeah. I forget the name of the plant that it comes from, but it's something that naturally is in the city there. But they, like if you're paying attention and you're moving through the city, you'll see off the back of the garbage trucks they have a little connection to the edge where they can like pull and like wind up so that when they wear out, as they do, they can just make a new one. So it's like very clever and brings it kind of back to repair and yeah.
Now, the staples is those regular staples for office.
Yeah. Swing line is my preferred brand. But yeah, just regular like staples. And I remove the coating. I actually, I fuse them, I micro weld them. So there's no solder. I remove the plating that they have, so that's why they're not shiny. And underneath that plating is carbon steel, so then I weld them together to build the pattern. This is the piece that's made with shoelaces. About, I think there's like 4 shoelaces, and then the necklace part of it is like a shoelace that I unwound, like took apart, and it's horrible because it's like this plasticky material and it gets snagged on your fingers, so I gotta figure that out, but I like that it's all shoelaces and some grommets actually. You had a question in the back? I'll come to you. The question was, how do I create the angles, right? In the staple work. Yeah, obviously. There's no angle here. Yeah. So I build it like a flat sheet, and so then I can just like break it, like like a bend with my. In one of the images, I'm using a pair of pliers because it's a small link. So I just bend it with pliers or around a steel block, and then the pattern, the way it works, like on one side there's like the single elements of it left, and then when it ends on the other side, it's like the top and the bottom, so when they wrap around, they nest back together. I don't know if I explained that. So it can be continuous.
Sometimes things that I want to read the patination, not the patination.
For the patina?
Yeah, take removing
I use the ventilation at the university, and I burn it. I was doing it at my house for like not that long, and I was like, I should probably not do this.
Are you wearing a respirator?
Yes, and I'm wearing a respirator. Yes. I just burn it off because it's steel. So I tried I tried different things, but I want to avoid like putting it in water. And so there was a time when I was soldering them together, but then I had to pickle them and then rest, and it was just unnecessary. And then the welding, I can move a lot faster. It's super fun. Someone else. Oh yeah, you had a question? Oh yeah, the way it comes together. It's a really massive room, like kind of comical actually. Yeah.
You talked about like you develop tender feelings. You didn't use that word.
I like that.
For objects, like over time, or if you repair them. I'm wondering if you develop more or less tender feelings for your own work, and like, is there something about the process? Like, what's the emotional relationship to your work after you've made it?
Good question. I feel like I can speak to the staple work because I've been doing it longer than the other two. These are like just one so far. You know, I'm working on some other iterations of broom pieces and shoelace pieces, but I don't feel like I still feel like okay, I'm figuring that out in terms of the making. The staple work, I feel like my emotional sort of relationship to it. I didn't get sick of it, but I got to a point where I was like, I want to do something different. Like, it's really repetitive, and I obviously like repetitive work. Like, I really do. Like, I get so into it. Like, if it doesn't have that quality, that's another thing. Like, the way that they're all made, even though they don't look the same at all, like, that repetition thing is important for me. But I just felt like I could keep going and going and going and do all these different sort of like architectural things, and it started out really different actually. One of the earlier slides are these like round layers of the staples. So then, I kept going because I could change the pattern, and then at some point the links became more complex and I could weave them together, like fold them and make them look woven, and they remind me of textile. Anyway, I sort of felt like I could keep going and I could keep pushing it, and I do, but I needed a break. So to answer that question, like I felt like I was sort of done for a little bit. Maybe not forever, but maybe there's still tender feelings though, like a little bit. Like absence makes heart remember.
What's your next material? Any spots?
Well, most recently, actually, let's read about this. I made some work for an exhibition that Carrie Ann and I actually are a big part of this big project that's a contemporary jewelry exhibition called La Frontera, and it was shown in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and now it's in San Diego, and it will also be in Tijuana. And so I made work for that exhibition using tumbleweeds, actually. Tumbleweeds. Because I was responding to the exhibition, the theme of that exhibition being the border, and thinking about, how can I use material to speak about my experience, or my experience being, living at the border, not being from there. So the tumbleweed seemed to be like a really nice metaphor for that, and I dissected it like I do, and I made pendants that are architectural in form, but I utilized the seeds of the tumbleweed, like the spikes and the flowers of them, and I covered the surface of the architectural form, so they just sort of are these look like these masses of these individual parts, so very similar to these things, but they look really different. So I don't know if I'm going like in a natural way, like it's kind of, I don't know yet. I need to do some more of these actually, like more of the brooms and shoelaces.